talking. That is not the wind. That is your last warning. I've been quiet for a long damn time. Let the bad blood pass, let the cheap talk slide. But your name kept crawling back through my door with a match in its teeth and a taste for war. I know a man like you.
Look, there's a lot going on today, especially with the SSPX. There's a lot going on in the church, out the church, a lot going on politically and otherwise. Wars are going on, or we're at peace now supposedly, but I don't know how true that is. What else, right? And so today I think I'm going to probably hurt some feelings. I'm going to offend some people, and some people are going to be very angry with me, I believe. And you're going to probably think I'm a liberal, but I'm not. I do not side with liberalism. In fact, part of my critique today that I'm going to go over, I'm going to discuss conservatism, is because I see conservatism as just liberalism on a slower timeline. In fact, you could say conservatism is the grandfather of modern liberalism. So it's not that I'm a liberal. It's just that I see all these conservative movements or philosophies and mainstream conservatives, right, as just old liberals, okay, complaining about young liberals. So please don't misunderstand me. And also, I want to be clear before you get into this. I want you to listen closely. I'm talking about the objective conservative philosophy ideas, okay? I'm not necessarily talking about specific individuals. Now, there are some specific individuals I'm going to list later on, but I'm not talking about the specific person who may or may not actually ever hear this, all right? Because you who listen to this, you may be a great guy who considers himself a conservative, who doesn't support some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, or is kind of maybe doesn't live by some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, and that's great, okay? But I don't think that changes the fact that conservatism, objectively, the idea, has these flaws I'm going to go over, all right? Please try to listen calmly, all right? Give me the time of day. If you're a liberal, well, you're not going to be here long anyway because, well, we're not on the same page. We're not friends. So first, let me take a couple of definitions of conservatism, a summary of conservatism. Now, this is by no means an in-depth, deep dive into the definition of conservatism per se. It's just an off-the-top summary, okay? A generality, if you will. And so I'm more than happy to discuss anything anyone might want to add, or maybe you think I'm off on something, provided it's done with an open mind, right? We're not going to argue, because you know what? I'm getting older. I'm 43, and I've lost some of my youthful patience and zeal with a lot that's going on, and plus my mind has changed over a long time with things, and I'm feeling less and less inclined to fight and argue over every little nitpicking thing, okay? So let's get into this. So first we're going to start off with what is conservatism. I'm going to take this definition from two places. One, Wikipedia, which, hey, I get it, Wikipedia sucks. It does get some things right, though. And then I'm going to also look at Britannica, their encyclopedia website, okay? So, according to Wikipedia, conservatism is a cultural, social, and political philosophy that seeks to promote and preserve traditional institutions, customs, and values. It emphasizes the importance of maintaining established social structures and resisting rapid change to government and society. And then, according to Britannica, conservatism is a preference for the historically inherited rather than the abstract and ideal. This preference has traditionally rested on an organic conception of society. That is, on the belief that society is not merely a loose collection of individuals, but a living organism comprising closely connected interdependent members. Conservatives thus favor institutions and practices that have evolved gradually and are manifestations of continuity and stability. That sounds real good. Government's responsibility is to be the servant, not the master, of existing ways of life, and politicians must therefore resist the temptation to transform society and politics. Now, that all sounds really, really good on face value, right? In fact, when I first read that, I thought, well, what's wrong with that? But then I read it, put a little bit more thought into it, and also compared it to what we see, right, in our day to day. And we're going to run into a couple of problems. Even though I kind of agree with much of this definition, there is a couple of problems, at least a couple, that I picked up on. And who am I? Well, I'm nobody, right? You can throw my opinion out in the wind, but I suggest you at least listen, give it a fair listen, and see if you can follow my point, and we may disagree or agree, okay? So number one, this definition, it works so long as we are understanding it and translating it with a Catholic Christian worldview. Because you see, if we're translating that definition or understanding it with a secular worldview, well, then it don't fly, right? We're going to have problems. We have to have a Christian Catholic worldview in order for this definition to work. And I'll get into more of that later. The second problem that arises is the definition shows that conservatism in practice does not build, does not rebuild, and in fact, does not even preserve or conserve really much of anything. Not permanently, not on any longer timeline. Now that, I think, is the thing that's going to set people off when they hear that. Because they go, hold up, whoa, that's all we do. No. Listen, stay with me. All right, so let's take a look at this. It seeks to maintain socially created structures, okay? Socially created structures. That is to say, it's not bound by truth per se or morality, but the will of society. The only practical difference between the liberal and conservative on this point is time and rapidity. What do I mean by that? In other words, conservatism, if enough time goes by, will accept whatever the liberals have put in place as the new norm to conserve it. They will do that slowly. So rapidity, time, speed, okay? Liberals will do it fast and quickly and move on to the next thing quickly. Conservatives do the same thing, except slowly. And then they're going to complain about the liberals wanting to change it to another thing. But over time, generation to generation, conservatives slowly get defeated. They then embrace the new change and then conserve the new change as if it always was, right? And then they start to fight again with the new generation of liberals who want to change it again. Now, I hope you'll caught that so far, right? Because it's a lot of words there. So, in what I just explained, they both accept change. Both accept the will of the people as the sole arbiter and dictator of truth, and thus truth becomes relative to the society in which it is. The conservative simply changes slower, but arrives at the same end. The liberal only needs to apply pressure and keep up the pressure. The pressure on society, to pressure the change, the pressure to accept some new issue or some new thing, right? And once the liberal changes something with the consent of the God of liberty, which is the will of the people, that they turned so-called liberty, which is a horrible abuse of the word liberty, right? They turned it into a God in and of itself. We call it the will of the people, or society, or culture. And so long as that culture, that society, gives its consent, the will of the people, then guess what? The conservative simply accepts that change as the new thing to conserve. No, we don't, I hear you saying. Wait, I'll get to that. Conservatism resists rapid change. But because government, as we saw in the definition, is not a master, and thus not a protector, as kings and monarchies used to be, of the current ways of life, it rather quickly just gives in and refuses to change things back to what they were because, well, it conserves, right? It doesn't build or even rebuild. And it conserves whatever's new, whatever new thing the liberals have pushed, so long as it has been around a while, right? So the new thing gets put in place, and then within 10, 20 years or so, the conservative now accepts that as the norm and will fight to protect, in a sense, fight, quote unquote, I use that term loosely, to protect this new thing that has only been around for maybe 20, 30, 40 years, right? But then here's the funny thing. It'll protect that till it changes again. Now, it'll resist it at first. I should say resist better than fight. It resists it, at least the current generation of conservatives, right? But then your children and your children's children will begin to accept it. And then their grandchildren will conserve it. They will attempt to conserve the new norm or preserve it. So once this new thing becomes the new norm, now all of a sudden conservatives change their beliefs from what it was in the past, and now they are conserving the new relativistic liberal idea. The liberals have already moved on to new ideas, and y'all are just now embracing the old liberal ideas. I know it's a lot of wordplay, but simply put, conservatism lacks any staying power, is what I'm trying to get at here. It lacks the ability to fight liberalism, truly fight it. It doesn't serve truth per se, nor does it fight for the truth. It fights for what the current conservative generation feels is morally correct, or thinks is morally correct, only to be given up in the next generation. Now, part of where I'm getting that idea from, aside from the quotes we looked at, let's see, one of the quotes was, conservatism is a preference for the historically inherited rather than the abstract and ideal. So conservatism is not looking for the ideal, the best, right? The way it ought to be. Rather, it's holding on to what has come in the past, okay? It's holding on to what has organically, maybe even organically developed, right? But in a society. But that society has changed over time, has changed its values, changed its morals, and the conservative will hold on to that new thing. It doesn't adhere to Jesus Christ or the truth itself, but rather what that particular society has deemed to be true because, well, my great-great-grandfather had thought it was true, so it must be true, right? Until it changes again, and now you're conserving something that your great-great-grandfather never did believe in, right? So it's an endless change, just like the liberals, but it's slower. And here's another line that from the quote was, government's responsibility is to be the servant, not the master. There's a partial truth there. That's why I like this, because, see, government is not meant to be our dictator, okay? We are meant to have some basic freedoms and rights as individuals in the image of God. But this whole idea that the government and our representatives, and a representative government anyway, is just a servant to the whims of the will of the people, that's ridiculous. They ought to be a servant to the truth. They ought to be a servant to the divine. Remember, in the past, monarchies had divine right to rule, but that also meant that they were subject to God. They were subject to divine truth, objectively defined truth. That's where the church came in, because the church was the servant of the truth, and was the one to guide any king or government. Hey, listen, that's wrong. That is not of God. But we don't, and this is with this kind of definition, we don't have that now. So, because it's just a servant of the will of the people, and it is not seeking the ideal or the abstract, when the will of the people changes, the government goes along with it. It has no tool to fight it in its own philosophy or principles, okay? Now, another place I get this idea from, aside from those definitions, is I've listened to conservative radio my entire life as a little boy. Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck. I even started listening to Ben Shapiro as I got a little older, when he came around. Mark Levin, okay? These were all like heroes to me. I loved it. Levin would get ticked off and yell at people on the radio. I was like, yeah, give it to him. You know, like, don't put up with this crap. That kind of thing, right? Rush Limbaugh, I'd listen to him talk about, hey, we're not defeated. We're going to vote harder next time. We are not losing. We're gonna blah, 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 and so forth and so on. And I started to notice a pattern, even early on, but I kind of ignored. I thought it was just being despairing, that Rush keeps saying we're going to win, but it seems like we don't. At least we don't win much. I keep hearing about how Rush will tell us, listen, this election is the most important of our lifetime. We got to make sure they don't get in, right? Or they get in. It's like, okay, this is the most important election of our lifetime now. We got to take back power. Okay, listen, we lost the presidency, but we're going to get the representatives. We lost the representatives, but we're going to get the senators. We lost the senators, but we're going to get the other two back. Like, that kind of thing, back and forth, politics. And then finally, I noticed something else too. Not finally, but another thing I would notice, that we would have the representatives, the senators, the presidency. And you know what would happen? Little to nothing. The only thing that would happen might be economic, right? You might get lower prices, which is great. I'm love that. Lower taxes, maybe, not all the time, but sometimes you would. Love that. I support that. Love it. And in the Democrats, and I like to say Democrat Republican, because I think Republican and Democrat are both liberals, basically. Just, two wings of the same bird, practically. But you'd have a whole, Republicans would take over, but they don't do anything with it. They don't go after the Democrats. They don't seek and destroy, right? They don't rebuild what the liberals took and destroyed. They don't do any of those. They don't even build new stuff, new ideas. It's like they're just playing games. Throw the ball over to Dems, and the Dems throw it back at the Republicans, and the Republicans like they're playing a baseball game here, catch or something. Hot potato. But when the libs would take over, oh man, balls to the wall, right? They were putting everything in. They were paving the way, knocking down stuff, trying to get Republicans out of more seats, putting forth bills and ideas, forcing bills through. Obamacare? Anybody? Well, it's unconstitutional. Well, apparently it's not, because they did it anyway, and nobody in the Constitution shut them down, right? No judges said, nope, throw it out. In fact, the judges supported it. They only removed a couple of things out of it. So every time I hear the phrase unconstitutional, bull, that has no meaning, no real power, because apparently both sides are unconstitutional, because they both claim each side is, and it never gets thrown out, never gets dealt with. No lawyer comes up, no judge comes up and goes, yep, unconstitutional. It's just the opinion of talking heads that it's unconstitutional. It's the opinion of certain Republicans or Democrats that it's unconstitutional. But it's just wordplay. They're just having fun with it. And nothing happens. Unless you're liberal. And then they push it through. They ram it down your throat. And I noticed something. Once they do that, and the so-called conservatives take over, Even when the Tea Party folk rose up, oh man, the glorious revolution, right? What happened when they all got into power? Well, nothing. We just upset some seats and whatnot, but ultimately, nothing got rolled back. They just said, well, it's where we're at now, but we're going to have a better future now. Like, and you're not going to redo any of it? Nope. We're not going to knock out Obamacare like they promised they would. They're not going to knock out other things like abortion and everything. And I'm not going to get on the whole, well, Roe v. Wade ended with Trump. Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. I'm happy about that. That's great. I don't really think Trump had a whole lot to do with it, other than putting a couple of people into place that led to that. But it's like that could have been done 20, 30 years ago. It's like, okay, late. And on top of that, he makes exceptions for abortion anyway. So it's a whole nother. I don't want to get on that. But the point is that little gets done. And that's where I kind of get this this pattern that I'm seeing when I look at these talking heads. And I'm going to use him as my example. So Glenn Beck himself has said that truth does not need to be defended per se or fought for, right? It defends itself. We just need to set it free. This like nice little feel-good statement I've heard him say before. Which, if you look at history, which I thought Glenn was a student of history, that's completely ignorant of all of human existence. All of it. Every time you sit passively by and just let the truth do its thing, guess what happens? Murderers, thieves, corrupt people take over, and they slaughter the people who were feeling for the truth, right? Who wanted to spread the truth, guess what? They get taken out. When they sit passively by and let it happen, that's what happens. So truth needs to not only be defended, but you need to stomp out error whenever you find it. That being said, the idea that truth just needs to be, we live in a pluralistic society. We live in everyone has their own beliefs and their own religious ideas, their own philosophies, and we're just going to let all of them go. And the truth, the best of the ideas will rise up to the top and the truth will win out. That is a very, very conservative sentiment. As the conservative resists but does not enforce or fight. Remember, government is not the master of the current society. Government can't just tell society that its will, the will of the people, is somehow wrong. And you know what? We're going to go back to what is good, true, and beautiful. We're going to do that. No, government can't do that because it's a servant, remember? It's a servant of the current society. It cannot be a master and say, whoa, the hell's wrong with you people? They'll be knocked in the head of something? No, we're turning the ship around. Doesn't do that. Because it's always afraid of some kind of dictator arising. Which, I'm sorry, you're going to get that no matter what form of government you have? You think right now we don't have a dictatorship of the hundreds of representatives and senators and everything we have? Or worse, the dictatorship of the will of the people? Look, representative government works in small areas like a state. You take like the state of Louisiana. It'll work good right there. But for an entire nation? No, every time you want to support what is good and true, you're outnumbered by the stupid and the selfish. Okay? And they're going to outvote you. Like, they had this analogy of, democracy is like the wolf and the sheep arguing for dinner. Well, I would say representative government on a large scale is like a wolf, a bunch of wolves, and maybe only 50% of the sheep, excuse me, voting for a wolf representative to decide what's best for them both. You see, it's democracy with one extra step. The wolf's still in charge. He's just representing both the sheep and the wolf. And he's going to help his wolf buddies out. You get what I'm saying? Now, once conservatism is beaten on any issue, okay? And I'm sorry, it always is sooner or later. It always loses out in the end, okay? Then the conservative cries about the days gone by. The founding fathers wouldn't have put up with this. My grandfather wouldn't have put up with this. My dad wouldn't have put up with this, right? Man, all of the 1950s were awesome, right? But once they get done moaning about that, they just slowly start to accept the new thing, and before you know it, they become conservatives of the very thing they resisted barely even a decade ago. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years. Now all of a sudden to be a conservative means to embrace the thing that conservatives 30, 40 years ago didn't embrace. Let me give an example. Homosexual marriage, abortion, contraceptives, endless wars. All are now ignored or even defended by many conservatives, especially if, what did Ben Shapiro say? Not specifically about this issue, but he said before, do you want to win? We got to win. I believe in Mark Levin is talking, we got to win. Let's not talk about this abortion stuff. We got to win. It's not a winning issue. Oh, you got to win. Okay. Well, there goes your conservative values right there out the window. Glenn nowadays, he said this a long time ago, but he still does, celebrated Dave Rubin, the homosexual guy, right? Who decided I'm a conservative now. Glenn celebrated Dave Rubin and how he basically committed child trafficking via in vitro fertilization. He paid someone to have a child for him. And then he took the one he wanted best. Oh, this one? Yeah, that's my designer baby. And took it for his own. And now that child is in a disordered familial environment, aka two men, pretending to be a mother and father. That child has been denied his right to a mother. No, your selfish desires, homosexuals, for a child do not matter because you don't have a right to a child in a homosexual relationship. You don't. You do not. Error has no rights. Disorder has no rights. That child, on the other hand, has a right, a God-given right, to a mother and a father that stay together till death do they part. No, you don't have a right to go out and, be happy, right? I'm going to break up a family and go be happy so I feel good. No, you learn to deal with the relationship you have. You learn to be better human beings. You learn to be better husbands and wives. You don't call it quits and just say, well, it's hopeless, I'm gone. No, you learn to be better. For the children's sake, yes, for the children's sake. But primarily for God's sake. Because this whole, I could just jump ship whenever I want, it's bullshit. It's selfishness. Pure D selfishness. And when you say, well, no, that's actually bad for the family. No, that's psychologists justifying your sin. All right? You're living in sin when you break up a family like that, when you turn to divorce. Then you're justifying it with bullshit pop psychology telling you, well, it's better for everybody. No, it's not. All right? And don't give me all the exceptions about real abuse. Okay? Because we love throwing that word around to basically mean anything. Once again, it's relative. You turn that word into meaninglessness. But anyway, the child has a right to a mother. And here it is, Dave Rubin paying to buy a child. And Glenn saying, congratulations on your fatherhood. Real good conservative values there, huh? Conservatives of 30 years ago, during my lifetime, would never have endorsed that. But once again, conservatism doesn't fight for anything, doesn't rebuild. It just goes with the flow after a while. Another one, Sean Hannity. Oh, he loves artificial birth control, right? Loves it so much, he betrayed the bride of Christ, the Roman Catholic Church. That's how much he sees himself as a god. That he gets to decide what is true, what is acceptable, what is not. He had the nerve to insult a Roman Catholic priest live on air. To flaunt his disobedience on a very clear-cut issue. We're not talking about a difference of opinion on some issue that the church has that we can all disagree on. We're talking clear-cut. You as a Roman Catholic do not have a right to use artificial birth control as a means of birth regulation. You don't. And you don't like to hear that? Too damn bad. That's reality. And if you're going to go against it, you're defying God, you're defying reality itself. Suck it up. But here it is. Sean loves that and is more concerned, really, with the R that's by his name, Republican, and sucking Trump's tit, really, than being a faithful Christian, a faithful Catholic. He dumped his wife, got himself a nice, shiny new one, dumped the bride of Christ, the Roman Catholic Church. His soul is in danger. If he does not repent, he will not make it. He must repent and turn back. And I say that for his sake of his own soul. And if you're thinking, gee, I'm getting kind of upset over Sean Hannity, you know what? Yes, I am. You know why? Because Sean Hannity, how many times did he say, I was in seminary? I know the faith. I learned the faith. Guess what? I was in seminary. And I'll tell you something. When you're in seminary, you form a kind of brotherhood there. All right? And yes, you learn the faith. And so when I hear this man talk the way he talked and do what he did about with the church, leaving the church, I take it personal because he's one of us in a sense. He was a seminarian like us, like me. All right? We all have rough times. He knows that. He knows what it is to be obedient and faithful and still offer correction. I can offer correction when the Pope says some erroneous thing, but I don't abandon the church. I don't abandon the Pope. I don't pretend he's not the Pope. I speak to him like I would a father. Father, what you're saying is it's not helpful, it's hurting, that kind of thing. What he did is Judas. So yeah, take it a little personal in that sense. It's like look at the army, right? If a fellow Marine sees another Marine and betray the Corps, even if they never met, he's going to take it personally and he's not going to like it. He's going to be upset. That's how I feel about it. So yeah, I get a little upset with Sean Hannity because he angers me, okay? Now, Trump himself, he ran on ending endless wars. Remember that? He condemned Biden, condemned Bush, everybody on the wars, and wars, right? And we all cheered. I did too. Thank God, finally someone is getting us out of those wars, which is something I had to change on because originally I supported all those wars and whatnot. But grace of God, my mind was open to hearing more clarity and truth. But here's the thing. As soon as Mr. Netanyahu, which in my book, whenever I hear that, it's like a word for nuts, Yahoo, came crying about Iran, I should say all the conservatives, but a lot of the conservatives that I'm seeing and hearing from, whether it be social media or the talking heads, right, especially like Mark Levin, they couldn't wait to kill every single Iranian they could find, including Christians. Catholic Church was bombed, and Israel said, oopsie. Other Christians were being starved to death, water and electricity turned off, practically genocide going on, from what I'm hearing, right? Now, I'm going to be open here. I want to be that I don't know which side I can trust when it comes to reports. I have a natural distrust for all of them. But the way I kind of go about it is I listen to all of them. And the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. Like usually both sides get bits of truth, right? But I truly believe there's something of, if it's not a genocide, it's damn near close to it going on over there. But more importantly, my Christian and Catholic brothers have been murdered over there, bombed, because of what their governments are getting involved in. In fact, when that church and everything was bombed and it came up that people started complaining, I forgot who said it. It might have been Levin, who was going on about, well, you chose to live in a terrorist regime. You're living in your leaders are terrorists. You chose to live there. Move, right? Basically. That's their home, for God's sakes. On top of that, couldn't they say the same thing about our government from their perspective? I'm not saying we are terrorists, by the way. I'm not. But my point is, though, they could look at us and go, well, you kill your own babies. You got men running around in dresses, going into bathrooms with little girls. You got women who think they're men, and you celebrate them. And you're going to say we're nuts? My point is, though, insults can go back and forth. Beyond that, though, how cold and callous you have to be to ignore what's happening to the people and then say, well, hey, choose a better government. Yeah, well, I don't see Levin stepping out on any battlefields. I don't see him resisting our own government when it oversteps its authority. A civil war was to break out. You think Levin and Glenn and the rest of them are going to pick up a rifle? They're all talk. Their sponsors may be rifles, gun companies or something like that. They Black Rifle Coffee or something. I don't know. You think they're going to stand next side by side with you? Of course not. That's why they can't ever admit that anything's wrong or ever say that, well, civil war's coming. Or they can't ever say that it's so corrupt that such a thing would be exist. By the way, I'm not calling for a civil war. Don't get that confused. But they themselves could never admit that, say, I don't know, elections were stolen or something. Even if it happened, they would never admit it. Why? Because they know it would go into a fight at that point, and they would lose their money. They're not going to get paid anymore. Now, another thing with this whole endless war stuff, nowadays wars become the norm. We are in perpetual wars. We went and fought for Israel, this foreign power. We went and fought for the foreign power of Ukraine. And all these conservatives are doing is humping Trump's leg so they can receive a pat on the head by Netanyahu in Israel. Here's another one. Conservatives said no taxes. Remember that? That was their big thing. Conservatives were all about lowering taxes. Liberals wanted taxes. They said taxes suck. America first. What has happened recently, though? No. Nay, nay. Tax me more, they say, for Israel and Ukraine. High gas prices, high food prices. It's all worth it now. It's worth to pay a little bit more if we could stop those mythological nukes from getting in the hands of Iran. Not that I support Iran getting nukes, but I don't support Israel getting nukes either. And I'm sick and tired of hearing, like all my life, I hear Iran is 1 week away from getting nukes. Iran's about to get nukes. We discovered Iran has nukes. It seems like every time they need a distraction or a good election cycle, Iran's about to get nukes. I'm just recognizing a pattern here. It seems like every time they blow up Iran and destroy their nuclear facilities, Iran's got another one within a year. Or, coincidentally, whenever they need a boost in the polls. Or if Israel wants to remove some of its enemies because they're getting a little too overpopulated, all of a sudden Iran has nukes again. It's almost as if, well, I'm not going to get into that conspiracy theory stuff, but you get my point. Now, let's take a look at Britain. It's not just the English. I think Ireland is having problems too. So, but there's a lot of violence going on over there, over the pond, where non-Brits are raping and beheading the locals. Okay? Now, you might be asking, how did this happen? How did it get to this point? Some might say that, well, is this the result of conservatism not having any power to stop it? Well, I'm going to take an article here I got. And in this article written by Charles Colomb, he points out that back in 2019, conservatives, and yes, I know it means something different over there than it does here, right? A conservative in America is not exactly the same as a conservative in Britain and so forth. They're different on some things. But this is going to prove a point that I'm trying to make, right? And hopefully we get this article out here. Take me a second to unfold this. I got it highlighted what I wanted to read. But yeah, I know they're different, but it does prove a point. And that is that they did have power at one point. And gee, what happened? Let's see. This is from Charles Colomb, writing in this is called Mancipia. It's from the St. Benedict Center, Slaves of the Immaculate. Let's see. Quote, in 2019, under Boris Johnson, out of 650 seats, the Conservatives won 365. On the surface, it was a breathtaking majority. Certainly one could be excused for thinking that Boris would, with such a majority, undo all that Blair had done in the Constitution. Alas, it was not to be. What looked like a solid majority included at least 50 former Liberal Democrats who would never have done so, and an unknown number of sympathizers. So Bojo and his successors frittered their time away and ultimately lost the election to Sir Keir. But even without the entanglement, by the time Bojo came to power, the Conservatives were hardly Tory. Part of that is the responsibility of David Cameron, who abandoned a great many traditional conservative notions to make himself relevant to the left. Wikipedia illustrates, for example, his changing the party's view on homosexuality. While urging members of his party to support the coalition's proposals for same-sex marriage, Cameron said that he backed gay marriage not in spite of conservatism, but because he is a conservative, and claimed it was about equality. In 2012, Cameron publicly apologized for Thatcher-era policies on homosexuality, specifically the introduction of the controversial Section 28 of the Local Government Act. The controversial Section 28 of the Local Government Act 1988, which he described as a mistake. Abortion, according to this faux conservative scheme, it is a sacred right. Now, have I made my point? You see, even over there, now once again, I know they're different, but even over there, conservatives get power, and what happens? Nothing. In fact, what did that guy say? It is because of his conservatism that he changed his view on homosexuality and abortion and everything else. So I hope you're hearing me, what I'm saying here. Now, is this just about complaining about conservatism? No. Because I'll tell you what, I typically vote conservative. When conservatives are running for office or whatnot, I vote for them. I have my arguments about voting, but typically I go with the conservative because we agree in principle on a lot of these issues and whatnot. But I can't call myself a conservative at this point. And this isn't just a complaint about conservatives. In fact, I want to offer what I think is a way forward. Not necessarily a cure for it all, but a way forward. All right? Now, before I say this, I want to be clear. Politics is not my God. I agree with Charles Coulomb, in fact, in this same article at the end, when he says that, quote, here, where's it at? Okay, quote, there is no political answer for England's, Scotland's, or Ireland's woes, or any other country. In other words, politics cannot cure the human heart or our sinful nature. But I do believe that there is a way forward. And that is what I call, or have found to be called, Christian integralism, specifically Catholic. Now, hear me out, because this is also going to put some people off. Only a system of government that has an integrated relationship with the Catholic Church, specifically, I'll accept Christian, any Christian, but I think only the Catholic Church has the structure, right, and the history and philosophy and theology to really make this work, and it's done it before. But as I was saying, has an integrated relationship with the Catholic Church, and based in the Catholic understanding of subsidiarity, can fight liberalism. Only the integralist system can both conserve what is true, good, and beautiful, resist the evil of further modernist destruction, and even begin to rebuild it. It has that power to not only resist it, fight it, and rebuild. And I believe this is the only way forward, because such a system would have 2,000 years or more of the analogy of the faith to draw from, as well as 2,000 years of philosophy, moral thought, and you know what? Practice. Anyone ever heard of Christendom? Now, most importantly, we would get rid of this idea of the will of the people being the guiding force. And instead it would be Jesus himself would be invoked and enthroned in his proverbial nation, right? Now, would this cure all our ills? No, I said it's not a cure. I mean, look at Ireland, even England. Ireland invokes, I believe, the Sacred Heart in their constitution. England prays a prayer over the king during his installation, right? And they've got a ton of problems right now, like I just mentioned. Even Jesus' kingdom on earth, the Catholic Church, has human beings who are in charge and have a lot of bad issues going on with them, right? So sin and evil and corruption and all those things are unavoidable in any form of government. But when you have a firm foundation, right? You have something to call upon to bring such a nation into correction. Because I want to make it clear, I didn't say this is a cure, but only a viable way forward to the future. Because in such a system, an integralist system, we would at least have the groundwork, all right? The nation would be grounded, and its laws would be grounded in Catholic moral teaching. A nation built on the rock of Jesus Christ is in a much better position than we have now. We would have a very clear center and goal to point to in order to guide the errors that do arise. You know, when you say, well, the Founding Fathers weren't infallible. The Constitution has been reinterpreted and revised and everything in so many different ways with so many different laws. It's like, what does that even mean anymore? Especially when the Constitution itself does not invoke the eternal truth, Jesus Christ. It's referencing how Washington thought truth was, or how John Locke thought government should be understood. It's very Protestant in a lot of ways, right? So it's kind of like up in the air, even though I went back to the Constitution. Which Constitution? The one that's been amended? How do I interpret the Constitution? According to who? The Federalist Papers? Or the current judges sitting in place? That's going to cause another fight. I feel like to me, it seems that if we had Jesus Christ in the Constitution mentioned, right? If we had an integralist government connected to the church, then when we say, well, we got to go back to what this nation was founded on, I could look at something solid. I could look at 2,000 years of moral teaching. I could look at 2,000 years of philosophy, of the faith. I could look at Jesus Christ and go, hey, with these current laws, they contradict what Jesus Christ taught. To me, that's a rock that I could turn to. George Washington is not really a rock, or the Founding Fathers for that matter, right? They're, I'm not condemning them all outright, but they're human beings who didn't do everything right. In fact, in some ways have opened up the door to what we have now. So I'm not telling you it would be a utopia, because utopias don't exist. I think it would just be simply a better path, a more just path that better disposes men to seek righteousness. And I think that is the biggest point, because in a society, an integralist society, right, you have a society that is more just and moral, which means you have a people who are being influenced and guided into morality and righteousness. Perfectly? No. A lot of flawed people. But the system is there to guide them in that direction. Let me put it this way. If I put an alcoholic in this society, right, he's going to struggle a lot more, right? Why? Because it's everywhere. You take an alcoholic and you put him in a bar, he's going to drink. But there's something to be said about the sense of the sacred, right? You put him in a place where those temptations are severely lessened at the very least, right? Then that man has a greater chance of breaking that addiction. Now, maybe that's a poor analogy. But the idea is that if you have a society that is at least has Jesus as the goal, where you're not allowing all these immoralities and disorders running rampant. When there's a government that says, no, that's illegal, you can't do that, right? You're still going to have those people trying to do their thing, but you have a greater chance of children being raised up to be at least conscious of morality and trying to be more moral. Nowadays, anything goes. And if the people are guided into holiness, righteousness, what kind of leaders you're going to get? They're at least going to have a memory of, you know what, hey, our country was this. This is Jesus Christ, founded on Jesus Christ in the church. They have something to call on that is solid. Now, the thing is, before kings and kingdoms can change, men must change. I believe Jesus Christ has said that. Before men can change, hearts must change, right? That's why we want a society that is more moral, so that men can change, hearts and minds can change, and over the decades be converted into the ideal instead of more and more liberalism. And before all that can happen, minds must change and be conformed to Christ. So maybe, just maybe, what it's time for is not Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. Maybe it's time for a new crusade for the hearts and minds of men in a society, and build an integralist society. That's our crusade, to make America Catholic. I'll settle for Christian in general, right? But I want Catholic, all right? Make America Catholic. That's our crusade. Make America Catholic. And I hope you will join me in that time. Maybe it's time. Bye-bye.
Fear not, brother.